Welcome to this important, meaningful program. Our speaker today, Joseph Alexander, survived 12 concentration camps. Now, all of you will be witnesses to the Holocaust. Without further ado, it's my honor to present Mr. Joseph Alexander.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. Okay, my name is Joseph Alexander. I'm a Holocaust survivor from Poland, and I survived 12 camps. I come from a small town in Poland, and I had a family. I had parents, 3 sisters, and 2 brothers, and I'm the only survivor. My father was in business, and we had a very good life in Poland until 1939, when the Germans came into Poland. They divided Poland in 2 halves. One half was annexed to the Third Reich, to Germany. The second part was Poland under German occupation. We lived at the part where it was annexed to the Third Reich, and we lived in a square. Europe, every town has a square, and there where most of the business are. We lived on the second house from the corner of the square, and the third house was an uncle of mine. After a few weeks, they come to town, and they went after my uncle around the square and told the people they have 10 minutes to get their possessions and get out in the middle of the square, and they took him away. Right away, a rumor started that they're going to come back 10 days later and take the rest of it. For some reason, which I'll never know, why they left those 3 houses where we were the second house. Anyway, my father said, I'm not going to wait to come and get us 10 minutes. So he got out and he rented a wagon. We had deep wagons, about 6-8 feet deep. And we packed up most of the stuff from the store, and he put a little few pieces of bedding, a couple pieces of furniture on top. And my father and mother and my 1 sister and brother, they left, because from our part to the other part, you had to go through a border. So he put some few household goods on top that were moving, and they left. I remained with 2 older sisters, and we were loading up a second wagon. And in the meantime, Polish people from around town that were coming in, and they were trying to buy anything they can get. So I sold one man a bicycle and a boat of shirt material. On the way home, he had to pass the police station, so he got stopped and wanted to know, where did you get this? He said, I bought it. Then show me a receipt. He said, I don't have a receipt. Then go bring the person who sold it to you. So he came back to me and said, you have to come with me, and if not, they're going to come here. So I went with him to the police station, and he asked me, did you sell him this? I said, yes. Why didn't you give him a receipt? I said, we in Poland, we didn't give receipts. So I took the boat material, smacked the guy, and go. And let me go. And I went back, and my sisters were waiting for me, and we took off. And we went to a little town, 25 kilometers before Warsaw. About 25 kilometers, yeah, before Warsaw, a little town named Bologna. Where my father had 3 sisters living there. So we came there. Their life was going on almost normal. People were still in business, but everybody had to go to work. So being there, maybe a couple was there, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And that's when I went to my first camp. That was in 1939. I went to a camp where we were working during the week, on the weekend you can go home. But the work we were doing, we were building a canal. The canal was, you stayed in the water up to the knee without boots. And that was in October, in the beginning of November. So after a while, I got blood poisoning. I had sores on my arms, on my legs. So one weekend I went home and I said, I'm not coming back. So Monday morning, the police came to look for me. And my dad said, he's not here, he's supposed to be in the camp. So I stayed away from home for a while. I went to live with my cousins, my friends. And that was a time where they started, they were gonna do in Warsaw, they're gonna have a big ghetto in the Warsaw. And that's what the time where they started to build the wall where the ghetto was gonna be. So after they got through building the wall, they came out with the order within 50, 60 kilometers, the surrounding area of Warsaw, every Jew had to move in to the ghetto. So we moved into the ghetto. The life in the ghetto was terrible, miserable. You can't imagine, because the section they marked out for the ghetto was a very small area, and they put 260,000 people in. So people were dying every day. People went out in the morning, it was on the streets, on the sidewalks, everywhere. There were dead people everywhere. So I lived in the ghetto for almost 5 months. And we found out that back home, since we left, nothing changed. Everything remained the same. So my parents decided for an older sister and a younger brother and I, we should go back home. So to go back home, you had to get out of the ghetto. So you paid off the guard at the gate to get out. So he got out, and we decided I take one street, my sister and brother take another street, and we walk through town and we meet on the outskirts of town. I walked for about a couple of blocks, and I had a Polish teenager spotted me and said, give me some money or I'm gonna report you. So I figured I'd give him some money or get rid of him. And I kept walking. But he got on the streetcar and rode the streetcar for a few blocks, and he comes over again, give me some more money. So this time I gave him some money, but I changed the street and I lost him. Lost him, I walked to the outskirts of town, I met the sister and brother, and we got home. So we came home, I said, nothing changed, the same since we left, nothing changed, the same thing. So, well, it lasted about 3 days. I was free for 3 days. After that, they came out an order that all the Jewish men from the 16 to 60 report to the schoolhouse. So I report to the schoolhouse and off I went to the camps. So I went to the camps. The first camp I went, we were building a dam. A dam is we were cutting down hills, and we had a little electric cars to fill them up, and they take them to another place and they dump it. The work, it was very hard work because we had to use picks to loosen up the ground. And the food you were getting was a piece of bread like this in the morning and a cup of coffee, and you went to work. You came back from work, you get a soup, which most of the time was from the peels of potatoes or spinach. From that food, doing that kind of work, you couldn't survive. The only way you could survive is because we worked with civilians. If you could organize just a little extra food, that's the only way you could survive. And I was in a camp where it was near a city called named Poznan. And there were one of the biggest cities in Poland. And there were camps in the city and around the city. So from the work, people were dying. So every morning they took dead people out. And then after, the same thing happened in the other camps. So they combined 2, 3 camps into one. Then I went to a camp, worked in the city, and it was laying cobblestones on the street. And that lasted for a while. Then I was moved to another camp, and I was doing sewers. We were laying big cement layers in. And that was a while. Then I was changed to another camp. I was a roofer, doing roofs. So far I kept moving from camp to camp. Then the last camp there, I went to building an airport in the city where we were laying railroad tracks. After being with 7 camps already, a train arrived, and it wasn't a passenger train, you know. It was the cattle car train, which they put 40, 50 people into one boxcar with a 2-foot window. And the destination we were going, it takes maybe 5 to 6 hours at the most. Well, we were riding around for 3 days, no food, no water, no facilities. So by the time we arrived on the destination was Auschwitz. Auschwitz was one of the biggest death camps in Europe. So I arrived in Auschwitz, and there's a little town named Oswiecim, and that's where the train stopped. Later on, they built the trains to go straight into the camp.
Okay.
But at that time, they didn't have yet. So the train stopped downtown and opened up the doors. About 30, 40% of the people were dead on the train already. Whoever could walk out, you walked out and lined up in rows of 5. And I met Dr. called Joseph Mengel. He was called the Doctor of Death. He selected people for human experiment or for the gas chamber. So Dr. Mengel said he's going to select people to go to the left. The people on the left are going to be taken on trucks because it was 6 kilometers to walk to the camp. So the people on the left are going to be taken on truck. So he was going through and he picked out the sick people, old people, young kids, and he picked me out to go to the left. If I would come from home, I wouldn't know the difference. But on the camps I was already, every time to go to work, I tried to get in with the biggest, strongest man. And here I look around, I see sick people, old people, young kids. I said, that's not the kind of people I like to be with. But my luck was after midnight. It would have been daytime, I don't think I could have done it. When Dr. Mengele moved further down, I ran back to the other side. So I ran back to the other side and we walked to the camp. And if I didn't run back to the other side, I wouldn't be here talking to you now. Because the people on the left were taken on trucks and straight to the gas chamber. So I ran back to the other side and we walked to Auschwitz. I got a shower and I came out of the shower and I got a tattoo. As you can see, it was 142584. From that moment on, you had no name. That was your name now. So I got a tattoo, and there's Auschwitz II, it's called Birkenau, about 3 kilometers from there. So we went over to Birkenau. I came to Birkenau, and in Birkenau, I was there, and I saw Dr. Mengel 2 more times in Birkenau, but there was daytime, and I was far away from where he was. So I got through all right. And Birkenau, it was the life. People was dying, terrible. People were just gave up. People were running the fence, the fence at Auschwitz or Birkenau. They were all electric fence. I saw people running to the fence to get electrocuted. I saw people being beaten to death because people just give up. They couldn't take it anymore. Anyway, I was there in Birkenau for a while. And then at one time I was trying to see, once in a while they had say they need some people to get out, take to work or get out to another sub-camp. I wanted to get out of there. So the only time I could was, they said they need tailors. So I report, because my grandfather, my father, we were all tailors. So I report, they come in front of me and said, you go back, we don't need anymore, we have enough. So I'm still back in the camp. And that was around the time, 1943, April 43, there was the biggest Warsaw ghetto. There was a big uprising in the Warsaw ghetto. So after that, they said they need a big transport, but they didn't want to take any people from Poland. They only wanted people from Hungary, Greece, Italy, anybody except Poland. But on the end, they were short about 300 people. They said, now we'll take some people from Poland. So I report, and the same train arrived, the same cattle car train, and we're going back to the Warsaw Ghetto for the second time. So the same thing, riding about 3 days to get back to the Warsaw Ghetto. No food, no water, nothing. So we arrived there, and half of the people were dead already on arrival. So I come to the Warsaw Ghetto, there's no buildings left. All the buildings were all burned out, just the remaining walls. And there's no camp. They gave us some prefab. We had to put together our own barracks. In the meantime, before you put everything together, there was no facility. I think a shirt I was wearing, there was no shirt left. It was eaten up from lice. Until we built a camp. On Sunday, you got a shower and you got some fresh clothes. And the work we were doing, what we came back to do is take down those remaining walls from the burned out buildings, brick by brick, and clean them up and put them up in stacks about 8-10 feet high. So that's our job. That was our job. And we worked, actually, this is the one camp we had plenty of food, because we found in the burned out buildings, we found a lot of household goods, clothing, pieces of furniture, and we had Polish people coming in with a horse and wagon to take these bricks to the railroad station. They were sending them back to Germany. So when they came in, They brought bread, salami, sardines, a lot of food, and we were trading. So we had plenty of food there. But after a while, the typhus broke out. Typhus is where you get very high temperature, high fever. And anybody I knew who went to the hospital, nobody ever came out. Never saw anybody coming out from the hospital. And I got this high fever, but I had we called a couple, like a foreman. He was a German middle-aged man, but he was also a prisoner. So he didn't care if we worked, we didn't work. You know, when I got this high fever, I was sitting like this with my hands crossed over behind those stacks of bricks until I got over the fever, and then I went back to work. So I went back to work. We worked for a while, and the Polish underground attacked our camp, and they were fighting all night, and they were unsuccessful. So the next morning, the coast closed the camp and took us out. So to get out of town, we had to jog to get out of town because they were afraid that we were going to get attacked by the underground in the city. So with the jog to get out, and we came to, late in the afternoon, we came to a big field where the farmers graze the cows, and the ground is very moist. So we came to on a field, and on that put us up there. And when whatever means you have a knife, a spoon, anything, you could dig up some mud. You dug up some mud, you took the bottom of the shirt, and you squeezed the mud to get a little water. So we had a little water, we stayed overnight, and the next morning we were on the march. So we come to a city, there was a river. So they let us go to the river to get some water. And when we got to the river, got some water, two of our people went a little further into the river. They thought they want to get out on the other side, maybe escape. So they got shot, they got killed right in the river. So we got some water and we walked in again, and we came to the next town. It was the same river, but now they said only 100 people at the time can go to the river to get some water. So we went, we got some water, and that day we start walking, and it was very heavy rain was coming down. You were soaking wet, you couldn't even walk, you could hardly walk, until we arrived at the railroad station and stayed overnight. And the next morning, the same train arrived, and we got on the train. This time we were 3.5 days on the train without food, no water, nothing. But we were going to Germany. Went to Germany, came to a camp named Dachau. Dachau was the first camp Hitler built in 1933 for political prisoners. Then he turned it into a concentration camp with the gas chambers. So I came to Dachau for about 2 weeks, did nothing, because they were establishing 12 camps within 50, 60 kilometers in the surrounding area of Dachau. And they were all named by numbers, from 1 to 12. So after about 2 weeks, I was sent to camp number 1. Camp number 1, we were digging potatoes for a farmer. But this was okay because we made a fire, and one of us was always baking potatoes, so everybody got a baked potatoes. But that lasted about 3 weeks. After this, I was sent to 50 kilometers from Dachau to a city named Landsberg am Lech. And that was camp number 7. Camp number 7 was a small camp. So I and the small group, we were in the camps already over 4 years. So we had the privilege of getting the better jobs. So friends of mine worked in the kitchen, and some of them went to the police in the camp, and then another few people were some little jobs in the camp, right outside the camp. And this is the only camp I was. There was women were in the same camp, but they were blocked off by a wire fence, 1/4 of the camp, but we went to work together. So I got a group of, we were 10 people, 5 girls and 5 boys. And I worked at the kitchen for the German guard, right outside the camp. And I had 2 men in charge of the kitchen. They were older men, nice German men. And they were very good to me. Because every day after work, I was going back to the camp, and I took some food back for my friends. And we always had some soup left over. So we had big milk cans. I took a milk can, I put it in. And the next morning, the people going to work, they had to pass by our kitchen. So I stopped them and gave them some food. A couple of times, the officer in charge complained that I'm holding up the people going to work. So my people said, don't worry about it, let them talk, do what you're doing. And that lasted for a while until April 28, 1945. All these 12 camps had to go back to Dachau. So I went back to Dachau and we stayed overnight. And the next morning, we went on a march, which they called a dead march. We also take us to the mountains in Germany. There's a ski resort named Garmisch-Partenkirchen, and they're supposed to kill us in the mountains there. But we were walking about 2 days, and we knew we're not going to be walking too far because we could hear the fighting going on. We knew that the American troops are not far behind us. And the planes coming over and bombing the city. So I walked about 2 days and crossed a little bridge, and the little bridge was blown up. So the group was divided in 2 halves. I was on the 1 half where we were in a village named Königsdorf, and there was a little forest in the village. And so they took us into that forest, and they asked for volunteers to take the sick people into the village and put them in to the barn at the farm, to the farmers, and told the volunteers to come back. And one of the volunteers was a friend of mine. And on their way back, they found a dead horse in the snow. So they cut off some pieces from the horse. And my friend comes back with a big piece of meat, and he said, do something. So I was in the forest, so we had wood. So I made a fire, and I was barbecuing. This is the friend of mine. It was him, this one here. So his name was Joe Buda. And that was me in the middle, and that was on the end here, that was a cousin of mine. His name was Mark Alexander, the same name as I. So a barbecue, that was the best meal we had all day. So this time, the guards during the night disappeared. So the next morning, the German police came in the morning, between 8 and 9 o'clock, and they took us into the village and they disappeared. So they disappeared, so we didn't know what to do. We just walked around in the village, stayed in the village until between 12 and 1 o'clock, American tank moved in and we were liberated. So we were liberated and they tried to close up the village, not to let anybody out. But we were 9 of us. We were in the camp over 5 years already. We didn't want to get blocked in. See, we broke through and we would start to walk about 1 or 2 kilometers, and there was a bakery. So we got in the bakery and everybody got a bread. If you had a bread, you were okay. And we walked, come to the next town. We see 3 American soldiers, but they were Czechoslovakian descent. They were so drunk, they were trying to walk. They couldn't walk, they were holding on to each other. And I guess they saw us, the clothes we were wearing. They asked, "Are you Polish?" Yeah. Okay, come on. So they took us in to an underground bunker, was a warehouse. You couldn't, you couldn't see the end of it. So much stuff in there. So first thing we did, change clothes. Everybody took a backpack and put some food in. And then there was a big row of bicycles chained up. They broke the chain. And everybody got a bicycle. And now we have to find a place to stay, because when the American tank moved in, after the tank, there were the American troops, and they came into that village. They brought all the people, our group from the village, into that city. They made a DP camp, a displaced person camp. Was a German Air Force base there. So they made a DP camp, but we didn't want to go to a camp. So we tried to get out of the street. We couldn't get out because it was after 6 o'clock, and 6 o'clock was curfew. So we hopped over about 3 or 4 fences and we came to a German inn, and it was taken over by the American troops. And the back of the inn was an empty house, so we took over the house. And we stayed in the house about 10 days. And then they said, anybody who lives outside the camp has to move into the camp. So we had to move into the camp and we were taken back to Munich. Munich was the capital of Bavaria. And there was not a DP camp there. You wanted to live, you could live at the camp, or you could go any place you want, you were free. So I lived in the camp for 3 days. And after that, a few friends of mine and I decided we go back to the city of Landsberg, where camp number 7 was. To that city in Landsberg was one of the biggest displaced person camp, the biggest DP camp. So we came to Landsberg, we went to the camp and we registered. They gave us a room. The reason we went to register is because there was a lot of DP camps in Germany. And we went and checked to register, and because in case anybody of your family survived. So everybody used to go to the camp to check the lists. So that's why we registered, but I didn't want to live in the camp. So stayed overnight. The next morning, I moved out about 7 kilometers from town to a farm, and I lived in a farmhouse. So I lived in the farmhouse for about 6 weeks, and then I decided to go back to Poland, to my hometown, and to see if any of my family survived. Because you know, when I left the Warsaw Ghetto, I left my parents, two sisters, and one brother in the Warsaw Ghetto. And I got out with my one sister and one younger brother. And the only thing I know is after I was in my first camp, because my sister and brother, after I went to camp, they went to another ghetto called Lodz Ghetto. So I got one letter from my sister. She told me that they picked up my young brother. He was 12 years old. Took him, and at that time they didn't have the gas chambers here. So they were gassing people on trucks. They were running trucks on wood and put the fumes inside. So they took him on the truck, and he was taken to a camp named Chelmno. That's the only thing I know what happened to him. I don't know what happened, never know. So I never knew, so I went back to Poland, come to my hometown, went to the house. So I had some survivors living on the second floor. On the first floor were Polish people. And they said nobody in my immediate family came back survived. The only one survived was a cousin of mine. He was 2 years younger than I. And we were in some of the camps together. And I was separated from him. And I was with also him and he had two uncles, two brothers, his father's brothers, two uncles. And when Dr. Mengel told me to go to the left, that's when we were separated. But he survived, and he's in a different town. That's him over here. His name was Mark Alexander. Yeah, we had the same last name. So he survived, and he's in a different town. And it was very bad for survivors in Poland at the time, because they killed a lot of survivors. They killed a lot of survivors with people who come back. No. Okay. People coming back when they took the Jews out, they moved into the houses. And now some of the survivors coming back, so they didn't want to give up the houses, so they were killed a lot of survivors. In one town, they killed 42 survivors. Anyway, so I was wed, and I was my cousin, and we went back to Germany. So I lived in Germany for 3 more years. Couldn't go any place because you have to wait until some country opens up to take us in. So I had to wait. So after 3 years, they said, you can go to Canada. So I went to register to go to Canada, and took a long time. You didn't hear anything from him. So in the meantime, a friend of mine wanted to live in the next village. He came, he said, now you can go to Munich and register to go to America. So I went to Munich and I registered. And in a very short time, I got a notice to see the American doctor. And then I was to check out by the FBI. And so I, a very short time, this still took, with a note to go to get the boat to go to America. So I went, I got the boat, and I arrived in America. Came to America, and May 30th, 1949. What is this? Got this. Oh, okay. 1949. Then everybody had to have a sponsor. So either you had some relatives here or an organization to sponsor you. I didn't have any relatives, so I was sponsored by a Jewish organization, which when my contract was to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I was sent to Harrisburg, and I lived in Harrisburg about 6 months. And I worked as a tailor. I worked for a man had a cleaning store in a tuxedo rental. But the man, my father, couldn't be better how he was to me. He was very good to me. So I stayed there for about 6 months because the cousin who survived, his sponsor he had an uncle here in Santa Monica. So I came in May and he came in October. When he came in October to Santa Monica, he told his uncle that I'm in Pennsylvania, and we were the only two survivors from both of our families. Excuse me. So the uncle called me a few times. I should come here so we can be together. So I came in 1950, I came to California, and so here I am. And now let me show you something else. See this here, this is built like shelves. And see, one section was for 3 people. On the second row, on this end right here, if any of you read the books of Elie Wiesel, that's him right there. That's the way we lived like there. One section for 3 people. And some of the camps these are the uniforms we used to wear. And also during my times, I was in the camp almost 5 years, over 5 years. I was in 3 camps. I had to watch 3 hangings. People tried to escape and they were cut. And then on Sunday, we had to gather around to watch them being hung. There was 3 of them I had to watch. This shows liberation from Dachau. Here is one liberation from Auschwitz. And as you can see down here, that was my tattoo right here. 842584. And I have one here from Munich. And this one, it shows you over here. I was in the camps from 1939 to May 2nd, 1945. So now, if you have any question for me,
Well,
I'll be happy to answer.
Why don't you say what you would like students to know? Well, actually, before that, let's get them up.
Why does this come?
You want to give them another message? You know, about Holocaust denial.
Yeah.
And or
So what's the question?
well, okay. Why don't I'll just finish a little,
Oh.
And then we'll get to questions.
Okay.
Students, the rise of anti-Semitism, racism, and hate in this
Yep.
country and around the world is alarming. If you see hate, hear hate, don't walk by and pretend like it doesn't exist. Bullying is a form of hate. It is your responsibility to say something, do something about it. Hate does not go away by itself. Now, you will be writing thank you letters to the speaker, and you already know about that, but we have about 2 minutes for questions. Joe,
There is a few questions in the chat.
yeah, that's what I just have to get to. When and how do you share your history with your children and grandchildren?
I always did. I still do. Yeah.
When did you start speaking?
I started speaking in 1997.
So about 25 years.
Yeah.
How old are you?
I'm 99.
And how did you rebuild your life in the United States?
Well, I came here and everybody was good and nice to me, very good. And I, you know, like I told you, I was a tailor. So I came here and I had a tailor shop that was in Victorville. There was an Air Force base, a big Air Force base in Victorville. And I got a tailor shop at the base. And then I brought my cousin there, and we were there for 7 years. I was in Victorville. And then I left my cousin there and I came to Los Angeles and I opened a store with a partner here in Los Angeles on Melrose. And we had a store called the Los Angeles Uniform Exchange. We were here for 37 years. It was military uniforms. Actually, you saw until 1944, a lot of the big movies, military movies, the uniforms came from our store. And a lot of TV shows, movies, another military shows on TV.
Joe,
Most of them came from us.
I hate to interrupt, but can you just, because we have to finish,
Yeah.
how did you survive? What you want to tell?
What do
Just,
you mean, how did I survive?
I mean, what you told yourself.
Well, I survived because I know I've been asked by kids, a lot of kids, because I tell them that I saw people run and gave up. They run to the electric fence. So I'm beaten to death. They gave up. They asked me, did you ever think of giving up? I said, no, I never thought of giving up. I never lost faith. I never stopped believing in God. And I said, I may have a bad day today, but I hope tomorrow will be a better day. But never give up.